Donald Trump is kicking butt when it comes to the economy. There's another trade deal among many that have been passed here in the last couple of days and over the last 5-6 months. This one is with South Korea, and there's going to be another $350 billion that will be invested into the U.S. That is a lot of money. But the crazy thing is that that's only a microcosm and a small piece of what has been happening here this entire year. There's been roughly $5.1 trillion that have now been pledged for investments into the U.S. this year alone by foreign governments who are trying to placate President Donald Trump. And there is really good economic news that is happening, including GDP, now back up to 3%. Wages annually are now up by 4.4%. And I'll tell you, the reason why that's happening, in part, is because of the firing across the board of illegal immigrants all across the U.S. You can't have 1 million non-citizens self-deport so far this year, and another 200,000-300,000 that have been deported by the Trump administration, and not expect that a certain number of those people were getting paid out of the table with wages that were most assuredly below what was legally allowed. It's the whole reason why companies will hire the aliens in the first place, is because they can treat them as semi-slaves, as less thans, as non-full citizens, non-full people. They can pay them less than anyone else, than the rest of the Americans are worth. Well, as that number is decreasing, wages will inevitably rise. And I'll add to that this is only going to increase if mass deportation gets underway. You're looking at somewhere between 20 and 30 million people in the U.S. illegally, possibly more, but certainly not less. And as those people get deported, and as more and more of them flee so that they don't get lifetime bans from returning to the U.S., wages will inevitably rise. We are likely on the cusp of a huge economic boom. Don't let the naysayers keep you from being positive here, my friends. I think we're about to see another large economic growth spurt for the U.S. in the near future. Now, anything, of course, can happen, but I would be willing to put money down that that's going to be what's going to happen next. So this is the Korea trade deal. Trump announces South Korea trade deal with $350 billion more dollars invested into the U.S. hours before tariff deadline. President Donald Trump announced Wednesday evening that he had reached an agreement with South Korea that will include $350 billion in investment from Seoul and lock in a 15% tariff rate for the Asian nation. He said, "I am pleased to announce that the United States has agreed to a full and complete trade deal with the Republic of Korea. The deal is that South Korea will give to the United States $350 billion for investments owned and controlled by the U.S. That is important. And selected by myself," said Trump, "as president. Additionally, South Korea will purchase $100 billion of LNG or other energy products. And further, South Korea has agreed to invest a large sum of money for their investment purposes. South Korea will also be completely open to trade with the United States and accept American products, including cars, trucks, agriculture, and etc." Which, by the way, that's one of the big deal with a lot of these trade deals that's coming in. Aside from Trump normalizing tariffs, which if long-term, if you're trying to find a way to either minimize or eventually get rid of the income tax that we have all been slaves to here in the U.S. Since World War I, one of the ways you'd have to do this is to bring back tariff revenue. And so normalizing that was important. But the second piece to this is the open trade. A lot of these countries had put barriers to make it difficult for the U.S. to sell back to their countries. And so this allowed industries across the U.S. to be destroyed because we had all of our massive environmental regulations from the EPA with their tens of thousands of regulations that they strapped upon our auto industry, steel, coal, etc., which drives up our prices, our cost of production, making us unable to compete in the open market. Well, all of those things are starting to go away now, and you're getting all of these trade deals enforcing open trade in many cases. I don't know about all cases, but in many cases. This is going to be spectacular for the U.S. economy long term because we need our industrial might back. We used to produce, for example, roughly 75 ships per year. We now produce 3. We've given up so much thanks to retarded leadership and short-sightedness of previous presidents from the 90s on. We've had a lot of idiots running this country when it comes to trade, allowing us to be damaged and putting us at risk of losing our world hegemony status. Our economic power is crucial for remaining the leader, for the United States to remain as the leader of the West. Now, the New York Post goes on to write that while South Korean imports to the U.S. will be slapped with a 15% duty tariff, Trump said that the U.S. will not be charged a tariff. So 15% for them for the luxury of selling into our markets, but not the other way around. South Korea faced 25% tariffs on its exports to the U.S. as part of Trump's Liberation Day package that was announced back in April the 2nd, but later delayed for 90 days. The president re-upped his threat in a letter to Lee July 7th, one of several sent to world leaders threatening tariffs, meaning hurry up, stop screwing around, and make a deal or else. In the note, Trump warned that the major car and electronics exporting nation will be hit with a levy in order to eliminate the trade deficit disparity that we have with your country. The president had set an August 1st deadline for countries to agree to one-for-one trade deals with Washington or just face U.S. deciding, well, here you go, here's the tariffs, live with it. So, yeah, so that's happening. This is good. And this brings me back to what I was talking about earlier with the market. This is another article from the New York Post. The U.S. economy, they note, bucks recession doomsayers as the GDP rebounds, private payrolls, and hiring surge. My, oh my, what could this possibly be? They write, recession? What recession? The U.S. economy bucked nonstop doom and gloom by economists, let's just say political activist economists, including some at Wall Street's biggest banks, and reported stronger than expected growth in the second quarter marked by a surge in hiring and wages. Now, how could that be with all the government firing? Wow. Gross domestic product, the value of all goods and services produced by the U.S. economy, jumped by a seasonally and inflation-adjusted 3% in the second quarter, the Commerce Department said Wednesday. Imagine that. That rebounded from a 0.5% decline in the first quarter and beat estimates of just 2.3% growth. A recession is usually defined by the GDP slipping in 2 consecutive quarters. So recession, we hardly knew ye. Meanwhile, private employers added 104,000 jobs, according to the ADP National Employment Report released Wednesday. That reversed a 23,000 drop back in June and exceeded the forecast for an increase of 64,000. So what is happening here is, A, you have a lot of federal employees that are being fired, the parasites in the government, and there's also a lot of illegal aliens being removed. This opens the door for private sector to start hiring more, which they're doing. And, as I mentioned earlier, and as we're going to read right here, annual wages because of this are spiking 4.4%, which is well above the inflation rate, which has remained below 3%, despite the harping that President Trump's tariffs would jack up prices. Remember all that. Now, some prices are going up, but again, it's not going to be anywhere near what the naysayers are trying to tell you, trying to lie to you about how the tariffs are automatically a bad thing. The reality is we hold the leverage. If you play the tariff game right as the country that has all the leverage, a massive spending power that the rest of the world desperately wants, we can come out ahead. Smaller nations would not be able to do what we're doing necessarily, but the United States can because we are the big 600-pound gorilla in the room. And the rest of the world knows it, and they are desperate to access our $30 trillion a year market. Now, Neela Richardson, the ADP's chief economist, says that our hiring and pay data are broadly indicative of a healthy economy. Employers have grown more optimistic that consumers, the backbone of the economy, will remain resilient. Now, that resilience upended dire predictions, again, for a recession by many left-leaning politicians, and even big banks like Goldman Sachs and JPMorgan. A lot of those are also in the tank for the Democrat Party. The Wall Street giants had hiked the risk level for a recession to 65 and 60%. Remember when they said crap like that about how Donald Trump would lose in 2016? These people aren't really that good at being experts, are they? And remember all the hair pulling, all the screaming and crying from everyone, and the panic in the markets, which have, by the way, fully rebounded. All of it was nonsense. All of it ridiculous. Donald Trump, if there's one thing he knows, it is business, and he is obsessed about tariffs. He's been talking about tariffs my entire life. If there's one man that knew what he was doing here and had a plan, it was Donald Trump, and we are now seeing the results of this. Now, one JPMorgan dashboard of market-based recession indicators put the likelihood at nearly 80%. Imagine that, with the Russell 2000 pricing in a 79% chance of economic downturn. Both banks have since lowered the odds to 40%. Whoops. By Jamie Dimon led JPMorgan, and 30% by Golden led David Solomon. The GDP surged without any help from the government as federal outlays declined 3.7%, coming off a steep 4.6% drop in the first quarter. So all of this is happening while the government is pulling back. This is not artificial. So no matter how you slice it, things are looking good for the U.S. economy. And they're only going to get better from here. With all of these investments coming to the States, there's going to be a lot of new jobs that are going to be well-paying. $5.1 trillion getting infused into the U.S., even if it takes a year or 2 or 3 or 4 to implement, is going to be a huge surge in funding, in cash. The U.S. is primed for a huge economic boom. Now, anything can happen. Anything could occur that might derail it. But for the moment, it's looking very, very positive. And I, for one, I'll be honest, I'm not surprised. There were people that I know that are otherwise brilliant individuals who were running around acting like chickens with their heads cut off, panicking about the tariffs at the beginning of this year and trying to tell me, oh my God, you got to get on this and let people know we're doomed. And I had to remind them that no, I didn't think so. Donald Trump kicked ass with the economy in his first term. Things were amazing economically up until the pandemic. And then we just shot ourselves in the face with a loaded shotgun, but that's a different issue for a different day. But if it hadn't been for that, we would be on a huge roll right about now. So it's certainly looking good, and Trump is making deals left and right. We're going to have to see what happens next, but hold on to your butts. I think the economy is likely in a very good spot.